Morning, everyone. We're just going to wait a few more seconds. I think the people are still joining us. So if you just hang fire for 2 secs. Okay, I think we'll make a start. So thank you to everyone for joining us for what is our 7th year of Patrons, although this year is certainly different to the last 6. We know it's not the same as usual, and that everyone really values the ability to chat to others and share insights at their tables. We're not going to be able to do that today, unfortunately, but we do hope that we can provide you with some interesting perspectives over the next hour. I just want to quickly introduce you to On24 as a platform. It's new to us, so I'm not sure if it's new to some of you as well. But basically, you have the ability to personalize your screen. So you should see little boxes. You should have the ability to make the slides bigger, smaller. You should see the bios of the people that are going to speak. You should be able to scroll up and down. Hopefully you can see me. You can make me smaller or get rid of me completely if you want. There is a resources box that has some useful links and documents in there for if you want to find out more about other things. And also there is a Q&A box. We are hoping to do a few Q&As towards the end, but it is going to be dependent on time. If you have any technical issues, please do drop a note in the Q&A box and hopefully we can get back to you. But otherwise, we'll talk about that in a sec. So in traditional Patrons format, we're going to start with an update on what's been happening in Pay and Reward, what we think, well, at this point anyway, is what we expect to see in the year ahead. We're then going to share our perspective on some of the trends we've seen as a result of COVID before moving on to our final section, which carries on where we left off last year when we were talking about the theme of responsible reward and how it's evolving in practice. So I'm going to be joined today by my colleague Sarah Lardner, who's going to take us through the economic picture and reframing reward, and my colleague Catherine Edmondson, who's going to talk about the impact of COVID on certain areas of reward. Thank you to everybody who completed our Time to Reset survey that we ran at the end of last year. We're going to be sharing the responses throughout the next hour or so as we go through our presentation, so you'll pick those up as we go. So as I said, we may or may not do a whole audience Q&A. We'll see how we get to at the end, but please do drop us a question if you have one. And if we don't get a chance to answer it, we will get back to you directly after the session. We are also going to be running on our LinkedIn community the opportunity to discuss with others a couple of topics. So the link to that should be in your resources box. And we are also going to be offering live chat on our website. Just to say, we are at the mercy of technical issues. My internet has a terrible habit of dropping. So if at any point one of us goes, we will wait a few seconds to enable the person to get back on. So please bear with us if that happens. And if not, the other one of us will pick up. So before we dive into the detail, I just wanted to reflect on the impact that the last year has had on all of us and continues to have. So I don't know about you, but whilst the Christmas break was really welcome, it feels like a lifetime ago already, as 2021 has very much continued in the same vein. We've all been running at 100 miles an hour, and depending on what sector you're in, the fallout of COVID has really impacted us differently. Some businesses have really thrived, others are struggling to survive. But every organisation has been impacted in some way, and we found in our survey some of the trickiest challenges people said that they've been facing were around managing resources, restructuring, keeping employees connected, and employee well-being. Now, it's not surprising that 56% of people in our survey suggested that they were feeling either drained physically or emotionally. And whilst most of these responses were done before we knew about the new lockdown, I kind of wonder if we ran the same poll now, if the picture might even be slightly worse, because everyone I'm speaking to at the moment says they're finding this lockdown more challenging and are feeling more tired and emotionally drained than previously. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. We have a vaccine in rollout, and unlike the lockdown in March, we can see a way forward. The question is, how long is it going to take to recover? And, you know, there is still a level of uncertainty. So I can't promise we're going to have all the answers for you today. We are going to do our best to share with you our view on how we see things evolving. So on that note, I'm going to pass to Sarah, who's going to take us through the projected economic outlook and impact on pay.
Thanks, Justine. Hello, everybody. When I was getting ready this morning, I thought, gosh, normally in previous years, I've been up at 5 o'clock and making my way to the events to do these pay trends. I'm not really missing that, but I am missing the breakfast. And those of you who have attended our pay trends previously, you know what I mean. So what I'm going to talk through is just the economy and the pay awards and the high and low pay, which is, as Justine said, the structure of our previous pay trends. So for your regular pay trends attendees, this slide will be familiar to you. It's not a surprise to share that the economy predictions over the last couple of years have not really played out. Brexit was, of course, initially, and then, well, you know, the world has changed. And to think last year, when we shared with you the 2020 predictions at the last event in February, gosh, how did we ever know what was involved in and how it would completely turn our lives and private lives upside down? And I did think about whether it was worth sharing, as even from the most reputable sources, in this case, the Office of National Statistics and the Bank of England, they are in essence still only predictions. But I thought better of it. And, you know, as this picture does really help to understand how volatile the economy is, but there is hope. So just to note that what you're seeing here is November's data. ONS will be releasing updated figures next month. But the table shows that the predicted and actuals. And so GDP is contracted and now is at minus 8.6%. So that is a significant fall. And CPI is contracted, is now 0.8%. It says there that the employment worsened and is now 4.9%, but if you've listened to the news this morning, actually it's at 5%. And because of furlough, it's really depressed, so we're going to see those rates actually increase even further. KPMG states that we could actually see a GDP growth of up to 7.2% in 2021, which would be absolutely great. But if you look at those arrows, notice that the 2021 are going up for GDP and CPI, which is what we want to see. But we don't want to really see the arrow for unemployment going up anymore, but it's going to. But in terms of the Institute of Employment Studies in 2020, at the end of 2020, they found that 1 in 6 workers were either still away from work or working fewer hours. And our pay trends survey results, as Justine mentioned, showed that 30% of respondents have already implemented redundancies, and we're going to see another further 20% planning on undertaking more redundancies. So we, you know, that aside, what we're hoping to see by the end of 2022 is that the sort of pre-COVID outputs will return. So essentially, I think what we're facing is a long road to economic recovery, but we are resilient. Companies have pivoted, and policy decisions have allowed for a slight rebound. So I think, you know, let's not dwell on it any more than we need to. It can only get better. So for our hardy pay trend followers, again, this slide will look very familiar to you. But again, like the economy predictions, pay awards by sector has completely turned on its head. And for some sectors, there has been a reverse of fortunes. And what I mean by that is the sectors that are expected to see the biggest growth in terms of pay this year do not normally see these levels of pay growth, as illustrated by the split on the left and right. I don't think this would be a surprise to you, as we've all really experienced firsthand, you know, the sectors that have really been a godsend and those that have felt the biggest impact. So on this bit, if you get your pens ready, I'm going to give you some key headlines. So pay award in 3 months ending November 2020 was 2%. And this is unchanged from the previous quarter, with the public sector recording higher pay awards of 2.5%, which has really been driven by the health and social care sectors. This is against the private sector's 2%, which have seen earnings fall as much as 2%, with millions on furlough. Last November, the Chancellor announced that a new policy in the spending review will include freezing pay for summer public sector workers. The pay freeze will exclude those earning a salary below £24,000, and that is to protect the lowest earners as well as the NHS workers. There are no official forecasts on the public sector pay awards for 2021 at the moment, but basically it's suggesting that anyone under 24k will receive a pay rise of at least £250. But although the government has yet to decide how much the increase will be, it's actually going to look like the actual amount to a pay, it will actually amount to a pay cut in real terms. Pay awards predicted for the private sector going into 2021 are more cautious, with expert HR and CIPD both forecasting a 1% median pay settlement. We're going to see a delay in pay reviews to buy time. I think companies have really wanted to see how it all pans out, and this information is supported through their survey results also. An astounding 36.1% of private sector companies recorded a pay freeze, which contrasts with the public sector, which did not freeze any wages during the period. And again, our pay trend survey results confirm that too. So going on to the sectors, we have seen a change, as suggested previously. Forecasts indicate that those industries that are expected to fare best and those which will have pay restraints. The largest median pay awards expected, and I don't think it's a surprise to any of us, is for food, drink and tobacco. Not-for-profit, which is 2.5% actually. Not-for-profit is 2%, and electricity, gas and water is 1.5%. The remaining industry sectors are predicted a 0% increase. But I'm going to just caveat that actually when we talk about the sectors. The sectors are broad, and with some they have subsectors, and within those, some of them have been harder hit than others. So let's take not-for-profit as an example. If you look at membership organisations, they have been more resilient and they have fared well, but charities have been harder hit. But then again, there are nuances in there. As a population, we have been donating to loan fundraisers. Take Captain Tom, who raised over £30 million, and he is only one of hundreds that have been inspired to do the same. So this is a bit of a long one because it's going to cover high pay and low pay within this. But taking the high pay at the start, for years now there has been pressure on exec pay, particularly around the equity, fairness, scale and governance. And at 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, the 6th of January, as the High Pay Commission predicted, the FTSE 100 CEOs' earnings for 2021 surpass a median annual wage for a full-time worker in the UK. A plus from COVID, if we can say that actually, is that it has slowed down the rate at which the CEO pay levels increased, which has been relatively flat compared to previous years. An interesting way to look at it, courtesy of the Commission, is while pay for UK workers has increased slightly, it now means that CEOs have had to work 34 hours of the year to surpass median earnings rather than just 33 hours in 2020. So they lost an hour. It is early days and it's not enough, but I think it's fair to say that the debate and drive to reduce the inequity will continue. I think we all share this, but those measures actually really bring it home. They're really great. So just moving on, a report funded by the Standard Life Foundation looked at the pay ratio disclosures for 1920. the average FTSE 350 CEO earns 53 times more than median employees. The top 3 on the upper CEO/lower quartile ratio leaderboard is Ocado, BP and Tesco's. And none of those have probably escaped any of us, really. In terms of the wider exec reward, again, there's a few points that I just want to cover. So looking at the FTSE as a yardstick, it showed that over 50% of companies expect to apply temporary salary reduction waivers for executive directors. Typically 20% reduction lasting over 3 months. These are temporary measures though, and execs are likely to see their pay return. Over 35% of directors did not receive an annual bonus in 2020, and those who did received less than 50% of the maximum bonus entitlement. And again, this trend will continue. To mitigate the short-term cash impact of the annual payments, companies either paid the cash element of the bonus in shares or increased bonus deferrals. Whilst there is continued focus on the financial, EPS in terms of earnings per share and TRS, which is total shareholder return, EBITDA, as well as non-financial measures such as employment engagement and environmental, social and governance, ESG metrics are becoming more prominent, and Justine will cover more on ESG later on. So just finishing with a high pay aspect, companies are applying more focus on variable pay elements compared to fixed pay. It has been a dilemma for companies around continuing to motivate and retain talent when their existing bonus plans cannot pay out based on financial performance, but affordability is absolutely key. So turning our attention to the low pay now. Matched with the pressure of managing exec pay, there is a continued drive to increase base pay levels. The spending review last year committed that the national living wage should be increased by 2.2% from £8.72 to £8.91 per hour for employees aged 23 and over from April 2021. And the age threshold will continue to reduce over time, which I think is good news. This will mean that low-paid workers' incomes rise broadly in line with predicted wage growth and modestly ahead of projected increases in prices, which means that low-paid workers' living standards should be protected. I read a report last year by the Resolution Foundation, and they said that the analysis analyse the impact of the increase, and they identified that whilst in theory it would lift more people away from the poverty line, often employees are still only offering 0-hour contracts or limited hours, so that actual wage is restrained, and I think that's something that we need to be aware of. But turning to the High Pay Centre states that 18% of FTSE 350 organisations pay at least a quarter of their employees less than £20,000 a year, and a small number of pay all lower quartile employees below the annualised equivalent of the real living wage, which is just below 17k. Again, an important aspect to note is the push and pull effect. The Low Pay Commission, which advises the government each year, is also considering recommending that the planned increase be reduced due to the solvency risks to businesses, which are currently exposed as a result of the pandemic. Another option could be that the target of raising the national living wage to 2/3 of median earnings be pushed back from its original 2024 target to 2025 or even later. And I think this just confirms the challenges that businesses are facing, how to ensure employees are paid fairly and at a decent level, and to manage their rising costs or diminishing revenue. So that's all from the economic and the pay awards bit. I'm going to hand you over to Catherine now, who will talk about the impact on COVID and as such the macro rewards trends that we're seeing.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so there's certainly been a great deal of speculation regarding remote working over the last 9 months, what it means for the future of work and how that will translate to reward. So I'm sure many of you listening are keen to understand what you should or could be doing that would keep you in line with the market and what's changing. I think I have to say up front that unfortunately at this point, at least as far as we see it, there's no definitive answer to that question. Around a half of the respondents to our survey said they expect flexible working practices will become more permanent, and they do expect to review their pay structures as a result. But I think it's still fairly unclear of what those changes might end up looking like. And we're seeing the same with our clients, many of whom are starting to look at what changes they might make, but they aren't yet at the point of making any decisions. I certainly expect by this time next year, or quite possibly even before then, there will be a clearer answer to that question. But for now, it feels like we're very much on the cusp of change, but what that change will look like still remains unclear. And let's face it, whatever market trends do or don't emerge over the next 6 to 12 months and beyond, any change within your organisation needs to be right for you. There certainly wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach to reward before COVID. There won't be afterwards either. So what's right for one business won't be right for all. So I would say if you're still kind of feeling your way through how pay and reward might need to change in your organisation, I'd say at this point you're in pretty good company. That being said, we have seen some changes in the last year. So we've seen organisations give up office space in city centres, believing that remote working will become more a feature. And there have been some companies who have announced changes. Facebook, who announced really early on, actually, that salaries for remote workers would be based on their home location. But in some respects, I'm not sure this is anything that's hugely new. Many organisations already in the UK have pay frameworks based on regional differentials, but they are typically quite simple. So London versus the rest of the UK, or as in retail, banded into zones or groups based on the local cost of living. And there's a good reason for this simplicity, as the data in many of the salary surveys, as I'm sure you're all aware, doesn't typically go beyond very broad regional cuts. And that makes it truly quite difficult to differentiate between, say, Leeds or Manchester. And even if you can, often the difference can be marginal. So it makes it really quite hard to justify the complexity of managing numerous different pay ranges. And we've also seen that some people have taken this opportunity to move away from the city in the hope that that painful commute will be less painful if it's only over a couple of days a week. And if more people do this, those regional differentials that we currently see around the UK may well reduce even further. And let's not forget, talent isn't just within the UK, talent really is global. And there's every chance that going forward, to retain the best talent, you're going to need a potentially global strategy, particularly for some roles in some industries. So certainly based on everything I've read, and I'm sure you'll feel the same, I think it's most likely that a hybrid model will emerge. People work 2 or 3 days in the office and the rest at home. And there's certainly some businesses like JP Morgan who are actively planning on that basis. Therefore, I think it's possible that going forward, pay may be less about geography and maybe more focused on performance and certainly the skills needed to drive business recovery. So while there are some obvious real benefits to an increase in remote working, I think it's important not to overlook the potential negative implications, like the people feeling more lonely or socially isolated. And it's been these negative, potential negative impacts and the want to make employees feel more protected that has certainly meant that benefits and wellbeing has been high on the agenda for the last year. And let's face it, it's going to continue that way for a while. A recent Nuffield Health report suggested 4 in 5 workers in the UK said that working from home had a negative impact on their health. And I think it's difficult to say at this point how much the context of working from home has impacted that statistic because, you know, for a lot of people, homeschooling has been a big part of working from home, and that's put immense added pressure on people. But nonetheless, we've seen many companies introducing a range of different initiatives to help combat the impact of COVID. Things like an increase in access to meditation apps, an increase in online GP provision, the launching, or let's face it, generally the reinvigorating of EAP, and the addition of electric bikes to cycle to work schemes. The pandemic has also seen companies changing their benefit terms. So some companies have enhanced things like company paid sick leave, while others have extended their benefits to their contingent workforce, which they weren't doing previous. Another big focus has been around helping employees feel connected. So if any of you have listened to the podcast Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, you'll have heard the discussion around the role of community managers and how Brandwatch have recruited recently a VP of Global Community and Belonging, effectively taking the responsibility of inclusion and engagement outside of HR. It's a really interesting podcast, definitely worth a listen if you want some food for thought. And then in a similar way, GitLab, who are a global organisation of 1,200 employees, all of whom work remotely, have shared their playbook on remote working, which brilliantly you can download for free. And it includes guidance on sustaining a remote culture, including focusing on values and focusing on transparency and gratitude. And certainly we've seen as anxiety levels have risen over the last year due to increases in job insecurity and therefore worries around pay, the importance of transparency and effective communication has been really important to mitigate that impact of that increased anxiety on engagement and well-being. And helping people feel valued and connected through recognition has also been a key element. And we've seen some great examples of staff recognition, whether it be extra leave, bonuses, or small gestures like chocolate deliveries. Channel 4 recently sent their employees a tea bag and a mug and encouraged them to connect with each other. And we've seen other companies set up things like channels on Teams to discuss podcasts and Netflix recommendations. So as well as COVID, we've also seen the Black Lives Matter movement gather momentum over the last 6 months. And this has caused many companies to reflect on their equality, diversity and inclusion practices. And we've certainly started to see recognition that perhaps previous attempts to boost EDI have in fact fallen way short of the mark. Some of the push is coming from the top from investors. Legal & General recently warned that they would vote against any company in their investment portfolio that still had an all-white board by 2022, potentially blocking the re-election of one of the firm's nomination committee chairmen if the company failed to take action. And we may well see further initiatives to boost minority representation, like the 30% Club, which has boosted women's representation on boards across some of the UK's largest companies. I'm sure I don't need to remind any of you, but disappointingly, gender pay reporting was paused in 2020. And although we fully expect it to continue this year, it's possible that the numbers won't really affect the true impact of COVID just yet. We've seen that the roles in the industry sectors most impacted by COVID, like retail and hospitality, are generally more female dominated, which has meant that more women have been furloughed. However, because of reporting requirements whereby anybody not on full pay is excluded, unless they were topped up, they won't form part of the picture, which means some pay gaps may inadvertently look like they've improved. But even though it's far from perfect in its implementation, gender pay reporting has succeeded in flagging pay disparities. And whilst we still await details on the outcome of the government consultation around ethnicity pay, leaks have suggested that 73% support compulsory ethnicity pay gap reporting for organisations with more than 250 staff. And even if diversity goals are not yet reflected in legislation, they definitely exist in the eye of the public. So proactively providing this information can help show employees and investors how you understand the importance of addressing racial inequality. So recognising this, many organisations aren't waiting for the legislation, and we've certainly been working with a number of businesses on conducting both ethnicity pay gap and equal pay reporting. That said, while there is an appetite for many businesses to understand what their equality pay gap looks like, or even their ethnicity pay gap looks like ahead of the legislation, there is a lot of pre-work that needs to be done, particularly around the data. And even if you do have the data, saying you now monitor ethnicity pay or signing up to diversity pledges just isn't going to be enough. If you really want to improve diversity and inclusion, you're going to need to, first of all, communicate an understanding of why you are where you are, share action plans, and choose initiatives that actually fit with the context and the journey that your organisation is on. And finally, listen and learn from your employees. Educate them as part of the journey. So without doubt, COVID-19 has definitely accelerated change, meaning the future of work has arrived ahead of schedule. However, I don't think COVID can take all of that credit. The acceleration is possible because of advances in automation, digitisation and technology that was taking place well before COVID. In a recent McKinsey report, it was suggested that executives reported moving 25 times faster during the pandemic than they thought possible on things like improving data security and increasing the use of advanced technologies in their operations. And as well as accelerating working practices, COVID has also amplified our social conscience, and it's certainly highlighted the great inequalities in our society, such as the disproportionate impact on the BAME community and the increased challenges of homeschooling for families without easy access to technology. The press and social media have been filled with examples of people supporting one another, raising money for good causes and coming out in support of movements like Black Lives Matter or fair pay for essential workers. And consequently, employees are looking to their organisations to mirror this, to demonstrate that purpose isn't being sacrificed for profit, and that employers are doing the right thing and not simply paying lip service. And this is driving a definite shift towards a more compassionate style of leadership. And what about the environment? So I'm sure we all remember the reports at the start of lockdown about the fish returning to the canals of Venice, and you were able to see the Himalayas again from northern India for the first time in perhaps generations. The impact of COVID has certainly demonstrated how changes in our behaviour can have a dramatic and seemingly very quick impact on the health of our planet. Now, it's possible that the COVID-19 crisis has shown us what a climate crisis could look like, in that it could be wide-reaching, global, and fast, in which case businesses must take action to limit the impact on climate, whether that be making capital investments more climate resilient or diversifying supply chains. Employees are looking to businesses to take the lead in tackling climate change and fill that gap where there is perhaps a bit of a lack of trust in government to do what's needed. And in return, the growth opportunities for a green economy could be substantial. So undoubtedly 2020 was challenging, but I think it did teach us a lot about what's possible. The challenge now is to move from reacting to the crisis to building and cementing what has been done well so far. And while I think it's difficult to say with any certainty exactly what change will look like long term, there are areas businesses can focus on for 2021. So I'll hand back to my colleague Sarah, who will talk you through what that might look like.
So all the things that Catherine discussed, I think will put more pressure on the companies, but it is the right thing to do. So the question is about how to manage the spend and how to direct it in the right place. And that's really important going forward. So what I aim to do with these last few sections before I hand over to Justine is to give you some takeaways, really. So just starting off about the optimising your spend, I think by assessing current state against the future aspirations, it will place HR in control and will enable space to create compelling, effective and sustainable strategy that will essentially support the business to transition from the recovery phase to the growth phase. It is important now more than ever to ensure that what represents as one of your biggest expenditures for a business, that is your reward spend, is working hard for you going forward. The pressure on businesses to reassess how they may approach the annual pay salary review is probably a reality right now. I'm saying probably, it is a reality right now. So your takeaways from this are: 1, to track salary movements, trends and your competitive position against it. Don't feel that there has been such upheaval that this isn't necessary. It is more necessary, because resilient, fast growth and in-demand companies will have an aggressive strategy for talent, a strategy to get your talent. As I discussed in previous webinars, did one with Randstad back in spring, remote working has opened up the talent market, enabling organisations to hire the best talent from anywhere in the world and for a broader and more diverse talent pool. So the questions around location and how to reward for that. Willis Towers Watson survey states that 77% of organisations have decided that pay will be the same for remote and on-site workers in 2021, and only 10% are paying based on remote workers' locations for all jobs. So I think that supports what Catherine had discussed earlier. And also, as Catherine talked about, tracking and staying ahead of the composition of pay and how prevalent the practices such as regional pay or travelling allowances are changing going forward is important still. So don't get left behind if things start moving ahead fairly quickly. Around half of organisations have seen a significant reduction in office and equipment costs. And again, as covered in my previous webinar, I think it's important to challenge whether some of that savings can be used to restructure the rewards for a distributed and more diverse workforce. Through analysis, assess where your reward spend goes and direct it to areas that add the most value. Budgets are going to be tight. Your CFO will be demanding added value from every £1 spent. Get on top of it, run the numbers and use it to build a business case to be able to continually advance reward and your people strategy. I think it goes without saying really, but staying on top of the regulations such as gender pay gap, ethnicity pay gap, CEO ratios will mean that you'll have confidence in the application of your reward policies and that any of the policies don't have any unintended consequences. And lastly, for this section, review bonus and incentive schemes, the short and the long term, to ensure that they're fit for purpose and that the features, metrics and rules will support and not inhibit future performance cost management. I think what last year has shown us is how inflexible and over-generous some bonus schemes are. The bonus schemes going forward need to be built with a level of flexibility to cover a variety of business results scenarios. So moving on to agility. So what this pandemic has taught us is that there is no room for rigid role definition and rigid organisational structures. Businesses require their people to be deployed where capacity and skills are required with pace. Instead of defining and planning for potential scenarios, the design needs to be more fluid and flex to any scenario going forward. And these are scenarios we don't even know is going to happen. From the start of pandemic, throughout the pandemic and post-pandemic, organisations will see their workforce and work design change shape, perhaps a number of times. So the composition of your org structure, roles and employees in readiness for growth is key. Therefore, it is important that proactive planning around the following steps happens. So firstly, you might recognise this terminology from previous webinars, but you've more likely have been through the transact stage, which is reaction, and maybe even gone through the transformational stage. But for the majority now, you'll be in the transition stage. So you will need to know where roles will need to be in order to fill the performance and or productivity levels of the business going forward. There's been a great deal of activity as a reaction to reshape roles, redeploying roles, reducing roles, furloughing roles, making roles redundant, removing duplicate roles. So what you need to do, if you haven't already done it, is to start addressing the management structures, ensuring that managerial spans of controls reflect the changing nature of work managed, streamline reporting layers, make decision-making easier and more effective, and actually start to really clarify roles and responsibilities. Aligned to that is about creating more sort of wider workforce planning analysis to identify talent demand, skills, capacity and capability. You need to know where skills are needed to drive that competitive advantage. And this is forward-looking stuff. This is not the reactive looking. So stop and assess against the business plan, which I would imagine is starting to take shape to help the company accelerate out of this. And the sort of things that need to be considered in the new, around the new demands on skills are the more sort of harder to find roles. And as Catherine said, these are the sort of digital market. So you need to have your finger on the pulse in terms of those in-demand roles. Use data analysis to identify employee return value and productivity levels in order to direct attention for role effectiveness. As mentioned already, you need to know where you're spending money, but more than that, it's knowing how your spend is having a positive impact on business productivity. And if it isn't having an impact on business productivity in the right way, it needs to. And this isn't an easy calculation to do. This is quite complex, but it's the drive on productivity is actually key at the moment. So lastly on this section is about assessing where you can build HR efficiencies to enable deployment of people and reward strategies at pace. Utilize the technology to enable efficiencies of process and insights, and let the technology do the heavy lifting and the day-to-day thinking. So as HR professionals, you can lift yourself out of that and actually start to think about the wider strategy. So moving on to performance, I think it's fair to say that actually employees have proven to be really adaptable, resilient for their employer, even when faced with their own personal challenges. So how employers conducted themselves through this period around how they furloughed, redeployed, made people redundant will be evident. And employees and past employees will remember any undesirable practices. So going forward, it's really important to ensure that all employees are brought on the journey of recovery and continue to be valued is at the utmost importance. So we're saying you can get underneath this by identifying where performance management or how performance management has changed and what it needs to look like going forward. Catherine and I have done a couple of projects where deploying or continuing with the existing performance management process wasn't appropriate. It would have just done more harm than good. So we looked at how to assess and not acknowledge different behaviours and outcomes that may not have necessarily resulted in original KPIs performance, but acknowledge resilience and a pivot of responsibilities. Secondly, to assess what is required in order to manage, drive and reward for performance against a new business plan. I've been astounded by how some employees have really come into their own during the pandemic, and the business has operated lean to ensure that every effort has been deployed where the business needed it the most. It's allowed us to challenge what we do that makes a difference and not to get caught up in the weeds that have no impact. From our side, Enecto always challenges our activities and decisions, and we all ask ourselves, will it make the boat go faster? Thirdly, to review how employees will get back to learning and progress their competence and prepare for career development opportunities. Employees are going to want to be remembered for the work they did during the pandemic. And how you manage those expectations are going to be absolutely key. So there has been a great deal of work already and lots of different initiatives around recognition, which has absolutely been fabulous. And Catherine mentioned some of the things that had happened in some of the countries in her slides. And whilst it has been a focus already, you need to look for new opportunities to engage your employees, recognise and incentivise performance and contribution. And while there has been some great examples through the pandemic, fatigue is setting in, which means that this needs to evolve to stay aligned to each phase. The sensitivity around recognition approaches and how they could land is really important to get right. And lastly, just to sort of summarise that and just put it under the umbrella of employee engagement, we do know that employees that are engaged in the company will receive will have, outperform those by, I think, 202% according to Reward Gateway. but generally there will be a higher level of productivity as a result. So just finishing off on my section, just talk about the employee wellbeing. When organisations are through the other side of COVID, the after effects will still be seen for a long time. And the after effects on employee wellbeing is actually critical at the moment. So recovery of the economy will take time, and therefore the impact to employees will still need to be monitored and managed going forward. Wellbeing cuts across mental, financial, physical, social, environmental, and actually even career. Therefore, a comprehensive benefits package should provide support across all these pillars. So it's really important that you think about how you create, curate, and deploy an effective benefits package to ensure that it's having the desired impact. Being clear on what the employee proposition needs to look like in 2021 will provide clarity and direction. So in that respect, your takeaways are to carry out analytics on your current programme to identify what employees value and what needs to be leveraged effectively in terms of benefits and spend and take up. Carry out a review of policies, absence policies, remote working to identify where they are working as intended. Assess whether there is enough wellbeing support programs in place. Enecto has created a wellbeing index lever to allow companies to actually benchmark their wellbeing strategy. And this element is actually missing in the marketplace at the moment. Develop and build the full employee proposition, providing a fresh approach, look and feel, as it's been more neglected recently. Lastly, continue with or build a multi-directional channel of communications with employees and line managers. And what was best practice was deployed during COVID and still being deployed now. You can assess whether that should continue, what needs to be phased out, and what needs to be refined. So just to finish off my section, wellbeing is one part of the human capital elements of ESG. To improve your ESG proposition and ratings, you need to improve your wellbeing strategy. And Justine will provide more context of this within the wider responsible rewards lens.
Thanks, Sarah. So, we first shared the concept of responsible rewards at our patrons event last year. Their resources section has our responsible reward paper in it. But just to recap for those of you who aren't sure what we mean by it, in basic terms, responsible reward is about how you do business and how you align your reward package to this vision. So in effect, integrating long-term sustainability with how you reward your staff. Now, we also shared the concept of ESG. So just a reminder for those of you that don't know what it means. Environmental, the E, the energy we use and the consequences of this. Social, the relationships we have with others. And governance, the controls and practices we put in place to ensure that we comply with requirements. Now, ESG gained traction primarily due to investor pressure. Bear with me one moment. I'm told my camera's not on, but it is on. So I think it might just be a technical issue. Apologies. I'm going to carry on talking. Hopefully my camera will come back on. I think it's a bandwidth thing. So ESG gained traction primarily due to investor pressure on organisations to demonstrate that they were acting in a sustainable and accountable way. And as a concept, ESG is about creating sustainable practices for the long term. So guiding the choices that we make and ensuring that organisational values and practices align with this vision. Now, as Catherine said, we've seen over the last year, partly due to the pandemic and Extinction Rebellion and the Black Lives Matter movement, a real shift in awareness of ESG, not only at senior levels, but more broadly. And our survey validated this, with 1 in 5 saying that COVID has really raised awareness of the societal impact and ESG at all levels in the organisation. Now, we've always had an eye on fairness and equity when it comes to reward at Inecto, but we've actually recently reframed our Inecto vision so that sustainable reward practice with a positive social impact is at the heart of what we do. And although most employees won't necessarily know what we mean by ESG, they are aware of the increased focus on inequalities and the desire of many to create a more equitable, collective, compassionate approach to the way that we treat people. Now, we've all seen through the Clap for Carers campaign and the tragic analysis highlighting the devastatingly unequal impact of the virus on ethnic minorities and the lowest paid, a real desire to see more done to level up pay and conditions. Now, this appetite to build back better has brought issues of social responsibility and policy much higher up the corporate agenda. One of the questions we asked in our survey was around what was driving ESG focus in organisations. And I guess unsurprisingly, the responses highlight the pressure is coming from all sides. So most prominently from employee and customer engagement, as well as a desire to align with corporate values. Now, if we put the E in ESG aside and focus more specifically on the S and the G, we do know that there's a growing appetite to understand how well organisations manage their people. So it's not just overall well-being, but also how systems and processes work to boost engagement and productivity. Now, there's clearly some organisations who are on this journey purely to meet regulatory requirements such as gender pay reporting or CEO ratio. But there are reputational and corporate purpose drivers here too. So I read a study that said there was a large majority of those surveyed think that big companies should be resetting their priorities. And more than 80% of the respondents said that they would remember which companies did the right thing by their workers. Now, we've all seen in the press the pressure that's been placed on supermarkets and other organisations to pay back furlough money when they've been seen to have profited during the pandemic, and how in the face of strong public opinion, some execs were somewhat compelled to take pay cuts to show that they were sharing the pain. Now, these aside, whilst only a small number of our respondents said that it was pressure from investors or shareholders that was driving their ESG focus, we know that for many organisations, boards pay attention when investors and external stakeholders shout. And we've seen a much more conscious drive from investors, particularly to understand people implications more from an ESG perspective, meaning that ESG is really becoming central to the board agenda. Now, the correlation between ESG information, a company's culture, their values, your strategy, and your performance is becoming increasingly clear. So companies that commit to equitable, fair, and sustainable business models really do outperform those who merely meet their legal obligations. Now, I think one of the biggest challenges around ESG is that we tend to look at it in terms of single-layer plastics. So we see many organisations make generalised statements about being a fair employer or obtaining a living wage accreditation that states they pay a minimum level of salary. But how do we actually know if the application of pay across the organisation is equitable or seen as fair in practice? So most of us collect and analyse information in a kind of ad hoc, unconnected way. So very few people actually pull together these insights to create this holistic view of how sustainable our reward practice actually is, based in facts and not gut feel or noise. So we do lots of different bits of reporting, but they generally don't join up. So, for example, gender pay reporting gives us a lens on distribution of pay by gender, but unless you go beyond the headlines, you can't really see what's driving the pay gap. Employee engagement surveys tell us how employees are feeling about working for our organisation, but typically they don't necessarily help us understand who are most engaged and whether they're the ones that have the most impact. Pay benchmarking helps us understand how competitive we are against the market and supports our decisions around pay, but we don't always know if those paid are actually our best performers. So this means that many organisations actually struggle to identify what are the most appropriate or meaningful measures that demonstrate good ESG practice from a people perspective. And what this typically results in is that measures that are being used are a bit too high a level, I guess, to provide any real insights. Now, lucky for us, there are numerous indices on the market that tell us how well we're doing when it comes to demonstrating our ESG credentials. We're actually not quite so lucky or accurate for that matter. So we've got some of the companies listed on the slide here. So for example, MSCI or Sustainalytics, these are guys that produce ESG risk ratings. So they score organisations on their exposure to ESG related issues and how well they manage that risk. So depending on what kind of organisation you are and the environmental risks associated with your outputs, that rating might be higher or lower. So the issue is, however, that they tend to generate these insights at quite a high level, and they're often based on data and practice that's described in annual reports. Now, this means that companies are assessed and judged either with, or if that information is not in annual reports, without consent. And it could be fair, or it could be completely misleading. So Boohoo, for example, was scored highly on ESG practice by MSCI, but they were then exposed for using suppliers who were paying below the minimum wage and were failing to prevent poor labour practice. Now, whilst these kind of indices are generally aimed at investors who are looking to invest in ethical organisations, they are inadvertently casting judgment on your ESG practice. So combine that with the increase of social sharing on the internet through sites like Glassdoor, there is potential for your organisation to suffer significantly damaging reputational impact with little opportunity to mitigate against it. Now, even though there are attempts underway to create a consistent, sustainable ESG indices, so the World Economic Forum, for example, is currently consulting on creating a common core set of metrics and recommended disclosures that organisations could then align to their mainstream reporting. The metrics that they look to report on still do remain at quite a high level. So the need to go deeper was flagged in a recent report by the High Pay Centre and the CIPD. And they were looking at CEO pay and the workforce. And they examined why, if employees are often cited as our greatest assets, why employee metrics play such a limited role in executive performance pay plans of our largest PLCs. And one of the reasons they cited was that employee measures aren't always seen as being reliable or comparable, and that there's very little agreement about how you define and measure things like employee absence rates and costs, or employee engagement or inclusivity. But they also suggested that a lack of consensus over what methodology to use shouldn't be preventing companies from developing their own approaches. And there is a real, I guess, need for and a role for REMCOs to explore with their stakeholders which people metrics, as well as other ESG measures, should be used to reward, recognise and incentivise senior executives. Now, whilst the High Pay Centre and the CIPD report was focused on metrics for performance pay plans, this is where much of the attention has been so far. There is a clear demand for proof from stakeholders, either internally or externally, that moves beyond good intentions. So if you want to start to take control of how others perceive your progress on ESG, you need to start measuring and reporting the results of your initiatives. So this moves beyond simply having policies to actually communicating the outcome metrics that show how and whether you are treating your employees fairly. So in effect, creating a benchmark that evidences your practice and not your intent. So to that end, we've been working on a framework that applies a workforce lens to your ESG goals that I just wanted to share with you today. Now, as I said, there's no standard approach or methodology to collating employee practice, which is why we've created our own responsible reward index. And this looks at 5 core elements of the employee proposition that can show where you're doing the right thing. Now, whether you use what I'm going to share with you now as an inspiration to create your own or choose to assess independently with our standard methodology is up to you. But I'll just share a few minutes sharing the concept with you. So the idea is to assess these core elements of your reward proposition so that you can create a benchmark of your progress against factors that directly relate to the UN Sustainable Goals. So giving you a clear view of your policy and practice. Now, what you can do is color code this. So you can maybe have in red the areas of that you face higher risk, maybe in amber where you've got some more work to do, and green where you're already demonstrating strong levels of responsible reward practice. The index can be used as part of your wider ESG reporting, so it can reflect your current state and over time show progress towards sustainable employee propositions, or be used to support evidence needed for non-financial metrics, maybe as part of performance pay plans, or just to add further credibility to your annual reports. So what I'll do now is just spend the last few minutes just sharing with you each of the elements and some evidence of why we think it's important to evidence your practice and show progress. So the first area looks at community. Now, this covers societal contribution, what you do to support the wider community, and how this practice fits with intent. So I'm just going to check if people can actually still hear me.
Justine, I
Sorry,
can still
Jess,
hear you.
can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Sorry, Jess, could you please move the slides on, or is it just mine that they've stalled on? Okay, sorry everyone, I'm just having a few technical difficulties. I'm just going to carry on. I'm assuming that you can see the slides. So the first area looks at community. So this area covers societal contribution, so what you do to support the wider community and how far that practice fits with intent. Connectivity, so how aligned employees feel to your company purpose and if they feel that they've got opportunities to make a difference. And finally, how connected your commitment to diversity and inclusion is with your practice. So it's really important, and I've said this already, that to go beyond the headlines if we really want to understand if our practice matches our responsible reward goals. So if we take diversity and inclusion, for example, apologies, I'm getting messages that people can't hear me. I'm hoping you can still hear me.
Justine, we can hear you.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay. So if we take diversity and inclusion, for example, according to the CIPD, the inaugural McKenzie-Dellis-Packer review found that many areas of inclusion and diversity, there were gaps between what companies said and what they actually did. So, for example, whilst there are numerous companies that said they were making progress on gender or an ethnicity, I can't even speak now, gender and ethnicity diversity in their leadership teams, less than half of them actually had specified diversity in their succession planning. They also found that whilst most companies said they had processes in place to support employees with disabilities, over 40% hadn't explained the importance of disability inclusion to their staff. Now, when we think about contribution for society, we know that there is a real business case for doing this, not just in terms of impact on society, but also our employees. Now, surveys have found that employees who volunteered with their company were happier than those who haven't, and they were more likely to recommend the company that they work for. And for younger generations, it can be a really significant attractor when companies offer volunteering days or donate a proportion of their profits to charity. But do you know what proportion of employees actually take up that opportunity? What proportion of revenue is reasonable to give to charity? And even once it's earmarked, is it actually spent? So to deliver sustainable business performance, you've really got to be able to demonstrate your impact on your community and what your actions are really contributing. Second section is governance. So as a section, what we're aiming to do here is understand how your workforce and pay arrangements are applied, clarifying how transparent and effective that practice is. So the type, I mean, Sarah mentioned this earlier on, but the type of contracts that we use, for example, is really interesting, bearing in mind the attention that's been paid for 0 hours contracts. So whilst they absolutely have their place, depending on the business model, increasing dependence on contingent work contracts can result in increased job security and reduced level of benefits compared to permanent employees. And with women making up a greater proportion of the contingent workforce than men, the rise in non-permanent contracts does pose a real risk to gender equality in the workplace. But this isn't something that's necessarily monitored. Neither is pay spend. So do you know what proportion of your annual pay budget is spent on out-of-cycle increases? And even if you do you have a handle on whether those increases are equitable? So there's lots of evidence from studies that show that men are more likely to ask for a salary increase. And our own evidence has shown that even when they're given in equal numbers, the actual monetary amounts awarded to men do tend to be higher than those given to women. And another part of this area is looking at board composition. And as Catherine mentioned earlier on, this is an area that's under real scrutiny, with investors strongly advising that they're going to vote against REM policy if they don't see progress being made. Now, not only is confidence and trust in leadership undermined by a perceived lack of diversity, but studies show that more diverse boards do perform better. So how diverse is your board and your senior leadership team? And what are you doing to change the picture if it is an issue? Now, the third section is looking at equity. So we're looking at it from the perspective of internal application of pay, how pay practice compares externally and how this actually then relates to your stated objectives, and how open your pay frameworks and decisions are. So this goes beyond the single layer plastic of gender pay reporting and examining if further analysis has been done and what action has been taken as a result. So without detailed analysis or conducting things like equal pay audits, you can't be sure that the concentration of men at the top or females at the bottom is the only reason for your pay gaps. And the level of transparency around pay can also really impact pay perception. So there was a pay scale study that showed most people have no idea how their pay compares to the market. And they found that 2/3 of people who they surveyed were actually being paid market rate, but they believed they were being paid under the market and that they intended to leave their organisation. Now that's just a missed opportunity and a potential waste of money. So understanding what is and what isn't shared around pay and identifying where you can be more open can really boost perceptions. Now, this is something that the BBC learnt as a result of the EHRC investigation into its pay practice. Now, whilst there was no unlawful pay discrimination found, there were a number of recommendations that were suggested, and these included things like regular reviews of pay frameworks, better record keeping of pay decisions, and more transparency over how pay decisions are reached. So thinking about it from how you manage pay from an equity and transparency perspective, where would you score yourselves in this area right now? Now, the fourth area looks at well-being. Now, we've already discussed this today, so I'm not going to dwell on it for too long. But how companies understand and prioritize well-being is really important, because a high employee well-being rate really does indicate a favorable work culture. And the more effective that you are at addressing mental health, the more likely your employees will be engaged and productive. And there's a positive business case for employees to invest in staff well-being too. So Deloitte suggests that you can expect to get an average return of £5 for every £1 that you spend. Now, we know that well-being is a bit of a ticking time bomb, and surveys from last year were showing that there are significant increases in employees reporting mental health issues, and that presenteeism is definitely on the rise. So considering where we are right now in the pandemic, this is only going to require more investment and more resource going forwards. But it's not just about offering lots of initiatives, it's what you actually do with them. So there was a survey by Vitality that suggested medium and large employers typically offer on average 30 health interventions, but the awareness of levels of them was actually quite low amongst employees. So if awareness is low, take-up levels are going to be low too. But are you actually monitoring it or correlating it to absence rates? So a CIPD report looking at health and well-being at work highlighted less than a quarter of those people that they looked at critically assessed the quality of well-being outcomes for those that participated in activities. So I guess what we're saying here is that having an offer is just not enough. If you want to be a responsible employer, you've got to be able to demonstrate the impact and the effectiveness of your proposition. The final section is looking at how well we manage contribution. So highlighting your progression and pay performance and the way you manage performance, whether you get value for money or investment, and how stable your workforce is. And this really matters because if we look at turnover rates and internal hires, for example, they can really indicate the degree to which you're able to retain your talent. And we know that the average cost of replacing an employee earning over £25,000 is around £30,000. So with the average turnover at around 15%, and let's say in a business of maybe 250 employees, that's going to cost over £1 million annually just to stand still. So identifying how you can extend the employee lifetime value can really generate a better return on investment and an improved employee experience. And if we look at things like training and development programs and opportunities that you provide employees, this really highlights your commitment to investing in your workforce. But it's not just what you say you offer, it's then what actually takes place in practice that we really need to understand. So promoting internally really does inspire staff. And when people believe that internal promotions are managed effectively, they're more than twice as likely to put in extra effort. But we also know that a major contributor to promotion decisions is outputs from performance management frameworks. So unless we know these are actually being applied fairly, we can be perpetually discriminating biases. And this can lead to restricted talent pools of those that are actually given the opportunities to advance their careers. So are you actively monitoring the fairness of your performance management frameworks or reviewing your rates of internal progression? And what could you share with employees to build trust and improve transparency? So I guess what I've tried to show is that it's not enough to say that you reward responsibly. You need to evidence it to your employees, to your customers, to your shareholders. And so using a framework like the one I've just outlined really can help you to bring this strategic and holistic perspective, one that you can track year on year to show progress and critically build trust and recognition in your commitment to your workforce and the wider society. Now, this brings us to the end of our pay trends session. I really do hope that you found the insights useful and that we've sparked some ideas for you to take back to your teams. If you've missed anything, you can click on the link that you joined on this morning and you can watch the session from the beginning, and we will be sharing the slides. So, Sarah, I was just going to check with you. Did you have any questions that you wanted to share now?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions that I've posted. One from Michael Cope. Hi, Michael Cope. Nice to see you're on our pay trends. Michael has said, just on pay gaps, is there any evidence that data is being increasingly shared via other channels, e.g. Glassdoor, Facebook, etc.? In other words, keeping a lid on where you are is not a smart move. Do you want me to answer that, or do you want to answer that, Justine?
Yeah, go for it. I mean, I've not seen specific evidence as such, but I think from the rise of things like Glassdoor, PayScale, we know that people are sharing their data, and it's just happening more and more. So I think you're absolutely right in terms of there isn't much point in putting a lid on things. We did talk about this in our pay trends event last year, and the mega trend of transparency is only going one way. I don't know if you had anything else to add, Sarah.
Yeah, I do. I think there's lots of companies at the moment that are actually mining all this data. I mean, you talked about it from the ESG piece, but actually there's lots of sort of pay tools out there that is purely only sort of less worried about the methodology and the robustness of pay benchmarking surveys, but is mining all of this sort of publicly available information and you know, making it sort of more accessible. So I think there is keeping a lid on it is more difficult to do, and you don't want to do it. But what you want to make sure is that you have that sort of narrative, that understanding around it, because otherwise it's just out there in the domain with no explanation, and you know, and they can do what they want with that information. Got another one. A couple actually from Richard Thompson. So how do we incorporate ESG into core pay and reward services like benchmarking? Again, we can both go for that one if you want.
Yeah, do you want to go first? Let me have a think.
Yeah. So in terms of the ESG, I think in terms of benchmarking and anything around pay and reward, it's about the application and the robustness and the fairness and the equity piece. So it's really being able to understand and analyse what the data is that you're looking at and how to apply it appropriately. So no unintended consequences are happening because it's not being applied in the right way. You know, so having the right level of insights, using the right, you know, tools and etc. I mean, we've got PayLab, but other things really makes you apply that data in a way that supports the whole ESG elements.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Sarah. I think that's one of the things we've tried quite hard to do with some of our clients, isn't it? Is not just looking at the pay position against the market. It's looking at it from a ethnicity perspective. It's looking at it from a gender perspective. So it's bringing in all these different lenses to bear. Okay. I'm conscious of time. So I am going to wrap it up there. If there are other questions that people posted, we will come back to you directly. And we are now going to have some Q&As on our LinkedIn community page. So if you want to join that, you can. Or if you want to message us directly on our live chat, the links are all in resources. So hopefully we'll be able to come back to you and respond to you. So if you're interested in finding out...
Sorry, Justine, Sarah. Is that how they can follow Electo on LinkedIn if they go into the resources?
Yes. If you're not on our community, there should be a link in resources to take you there to join our community, or you can message us on our live chat, which is on our website. Again, I think the link should be in the resources, and if it's not, please just go to our website. If you're interested in finding out any more about our Responsible Reward Index or any of our Inecto services like Employee Wellbeing that Sarah mentioned, absolutely please do let us know. We'll be sharing the finding of our survey in the next few days, so keep an eye out for it in your inbox. I'm also pleased to announce that Ashfords are the winner of the free reward audit that we offered with the survey completion, so we'll be in touch with you directly. As always, today's session does count towards your CPD, so please do let us know if you'd like us to send you a certificate. And we will be running our spring webinars towards the end of April, so we'll be sending out more information nearer the time. So I'm apologies you can't see me, but hopefully you could hear me okay. Thank you very much for joining us. Please do stay well, and we hope to see you again in person very soon.
Thank you. Thanks for joining.
Bye.
Bye.